Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sarah Ruth, the executive producer of Chicago Ideas. Just a quick note before we get started. We encourage you to join the conversation, so please feel free to tweet any questions you have for John using the hashtag Chicago Ideas or email us at info@chicagoideas.com. Guiding the conversation this evening is Laura Washington, Chicago Sun-Times columnist and political analyst for ABC7. Our guest is the chief White House correspondent for ABC News and the president of the White House Correspondents Association. His new book, Front Row at the Trump Show, has spent several weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Please welcome Jonathan Karl and Laura Washington.
Sarah.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi, John.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Welcome to Chicago, virtually.
It's great to be in Chicago.
You have, I understand you have some strong ties here, particularly through your daughter and Northwestern.
Yes, absolutely. I've got the Northwestern purple right here. She graduated. My daughter Emily graduated last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And congratulations on the book. It's a great read and a bestseller.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
you.
So
tell me about the title. The title is, very interesting. Front Row at the Trump Show. It's a title that might seem a little bit irreverent or a little bit offhand when you're talking about the presidency and covering the presidency.
Yeah, well, I picked that title because that's truly the way I believe Donald Trump sees his presidency. He, if you listen to how he talks about his presidency, he talks about the size of his crowds at his rallies, the ratings of his briefings on cable news. He, like anybody who's got a show, is putting on a show. He cares what the critics have to say. He complains about the critics, but he, wants their approval. He was a reality TV star, of course, who ran for president. And most people thought that, first of all, he was never going to run. He was just trying to promote his reality TV show. And then when he did run, it was really seen as more of a ploy to bring attention to himself and, extend The Apprentice to a larger stage. And then he won. And I think it surprised just about everybody. I think it surprised Donald Trump that he won, but he didn't stop seeing it in those terms. I mean, wasn't it astounding? We had our first briefing by the new press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, the other day, and she ended it. It was a briefing that was less contentious than any of those that were done by Sean Spicer, or most that were done by Sarah Sanders. But she ended it by promoting the president's appearance on a Fox town hall coming up over the weekend, and then said that it was going to be just as big a draw as the highly rated coronavirus briefings. I mean, can you imagine the White House press secretary talking about briefings during a pandemic as a highly rated event?
At least the press secretary was having briefings. Those disappeared for a while there. Yes. And you know better than anyone, you've covered 4 administrations, so you're not new to covering the White House, but you're also not new by any means to covering Donald Trump. You've been covering and following him, and you've known him longer than anybody else covering Washington right now, right?
I mean, I was looking at it. I think that I may have known Donald Trump longer than anybody on the White House staff, anybody working for him, with the exception of his daughter, Ivanka. I first met him back in 1994 when I was a very, very, very junior reporter for the New York Post. So I go back a long, long way with Donald Trump. Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, this photo.
This picture tells a story, because this came at the time you interviewed Donald Trump, and it involved Michael Jackson, of all people. Yeah. And when you were at the Post, the New York Post, correct? And tell us how you ended up in that picture with Donald Trump and what the story was about.
First of all, I apologize for the tie. I think I got it for $3 from one of those street vendors in New York. And if you look at Donald Trump, so this is 1994. I swear, I mean, look, he's got the same, that tie is a black and white photograph, but that tie, trust me, is red. It's a little long, like all his ties are. It's probably the same suit, maybe a few sizes smaller than the one he wears now, but the same. I mean, he's the same guy. That same expression that you've seen on 1,000 pictures taken, now in the Oval Office behind the resolute desk. But this was a wild story. I was covering City Hall for the New York Post, and I was like the number 3 guy at City Hall for the New York Post. I mean, I was a very junior reporter. I really only cared about politics, and I wanted to be a political reporter, and I was trying to work my way up. And this story hit New York that blew everybody away. Michael Jackson, who was at the absolute peak of his popularity, the king of pop, it had been revealed, secretly married Lisa Marie Presley, of course, the daughter of Elvis. So, I mean, it's all anybody at the New York Post cared about. It's all most people in New York cared about. It's all, I mean, let's face it, this was all most people in the country were talking about at that particular moment.
It sounds like Donald Trump's kind of story.
What's that?
It sounds like Donald Trump's kind of story.
It's a Donald Trump kind of story, but here's why it's really a Donald Trump kind of story, because it turned out that although the newlyweds had not been seen in public yet, they were staying at Trump Tower. They were staying at Trump Tower. So I didn't know Trump, but I called up the general number. I got the number out of the phone book, and I asked if I could speak to Donald Trump. Not expecting to go anywhere, but look, I couldn't be reporting on City Hall this day because the New York Post.
This is a better story.
Yeah. So I figured on a whim I would just do it, and I got connected to his secretary, his gatekeeper.
She's kind of a dragon lady, right?
Yeah. Norma Federer. She was a piece of work, by the way. I ended up having many interactions with her over the years. She died several years ago before the presidential campaign, but she was the gatekeeper for everything. Anything, it was basically her to Donald Trump, and that was it. That was the org chart at the Trump organization. And I said, look, but I didn't know any of that. I just, this was almost a goof, you know. And I said, I want to do a story about why the most famous newlyweds on the planet decided to start their honeymoon at Trump Tower. And he called me back in less than an hour and invited me up to Trump Tower. I went by all the police lines that had been set up to keep the paparazzi away. I got, come on in, come on in. Went up to his office. He brought me up, showed me where they were staying, introduced me to Michael's bodyguards, showed me how they came in and out of Trump Tower in the tunnels below, and then proceeded to tell me all the great things about Trump Tower. We did like 4 or 5 stories in the paper the next day. It was the big front page of the New York Post. And that picture that you showed, what just happened while I was walking around with him. He was showing, that was actually in his apartment on the 68th floor of Trump Tower. And he said, do you want to get a picture? And I said, well, we've been taking pictures. What do you mean? He's like, take a picture with him. It didn't even occur to me. You know, when you're a reporter, you usually don't expect your subject to say, hey, do you want to get a picture? But there it is.
Yeah, absolutely. You look like you'd rather be somewhere else, even though you're grinning.
Yeah, I was like, what is going on here? You know, I've got my pen. I'm like trying to what am I doing here?
Yeah. But you know, as you point out, you spend a good deal of time in the book talking about the relationship between not only you as a reporter, but between him and the press, and it's been very combative over his entire presidency. He's accused us of reporting fake news. He's accused us of being enemy of the state. He said nasty things about you to your face at press conferences. You're a cutie pie. That wasn't too bad, but you're a wise guy. You're a hack. You're third rate. You once said that you'll never make it in the business. So square that with the fact that you also say in the book that he loves the media. That he was, I think what you said was he's in love with the media. How do those two things come together?
Well, he, you know, this is the Trump show, and every good show needs a villain, and he has found the most convenient villain is the press. And I recount a conversation I had with Steve Bannon, who was the chief strategist, of course, in the early days of this administration. And Bannon gave an interview. This was just like a week or so into the Trump White House, and Bannon gave an interview with the New York Times, by the way, and he said that the press is the opposition party, not the Democrats. It's the press that are the opposition party, which I found kind of ironic that he was telling this to the New York Times, and the New York Times was dutifully reporting it. His words, quite accurately, kind of proving the point that we're not really the opposition party. We're reporters, and we you know, I mean, this is a ridiculous notion. But so Bannon coined the phrase. The president made it his own by like the next day. He was calling the press the opposition party. And the way Bannon described it in this conversation I had with him in the East Room of the White House was right as he was right around the nomination of I think it was the event where the president announced that Neil Gorsuch was his nominee for the Supreme Court. Bannon said, look, I actually think you guys are doing a pretty fair job, you know, meaning you guys, the press writ large. You're doing a pretty good job, but you're a much more convenient foil for us than the Democrats. You know, we want to get union members to support us. We want to get, you know, the white working class to support us. We you know, those are Democrats. So we're not wanting to vilify their party. We want to vilify you. And Donald Trump himself has, you know, told Leslie Stahl in 2016 that the reason why he does it, she was like, "Well, why do you do this? You know it's not true. Why this is getting old. All these attacks on the press." And Trump said, "I do it so that when you do a negative story about me, nobody will believe you." So you have a couple of reasons here. You have it's a show. He's a big, you know, you need your villain. You're a scapegoat. Your scapegoat. Press is much easier than Democrats for that. And the other thing is, make people believe that they can't believe what they read in the newspaper. Make people think that all those negative stories have no more credibility than a press release from the DNC. You know, it's just what do you expect? Of course they're going to attack me. They're the opposition. So
and you weaken the opposition. And yet, one of the things I appreciate in the book too is you also will point out that sometimes we as journalists play into that strategy and we act like the opposition and we bring bias. We don't want to talk about it, but some of us have maybe approached covering Trump from a bias perspective, and that feeds into his strategy, and it's dangerous. And how is it dangerous?
It is dangerous because it gives people the impression that we are the opposition party, and therefore, our objective is not to report truth, not to report with accuracy and fairness, but just to go out to get the guy. And if they think that, then they're not going to believe what's right before their eyes. And it's one thing if the president wants to make unfair attacks about fake news and say, you people make it up all the time, you make up anonymous sources, it's all not real. He can try to do that, but if we are acting in a way that makes it look like we're just out to oppose him, not out to seek the truth, then we lead credence to that argument. Now it's tough because, first of all, I think that people go into journalism for a variety of reasons. I mean, I went into journalism because I wanted to have a front row seat to history, and I wanted to see it all unfold.
Got it.
But everybody has opinions, including reporters. Now, I've got a good friend of mine, you may know him, Mike Allen with Axios, who takes the position that his objectivity is so important that he can't vote because he doesn't want to take sides even on election day. And I know there are I've got other colleagues who take a similar point of view. I don't agree with that. I think that we're Americans too, and we have a responsibility to vote. We should vote, and doesn't mean that that our vote's affecting our coverage. But when you have somebody like Donald Trump come in and who stands for some things that many journalists in their own personal lives are horrified by, and somebody who is vilifying your very essence professionally, and declaring a free press, something we all believe in our core is essential and a quintessentially American value, to suggest it is a traitorous thing, that we are the enemy of the people, it's offensive, and you want to fight back and you want to hit back. And the balance is, how do you correct the record without just, again, appearing like you're in a partisan battle with the president? And it's not easy.
Especially when you describe scenes in the book where you're in a White House press conference with him and he's baiting you. He's done that a lot to Jim Acosta, and sometimes Jim Acosta has taken the bait, as you point out. So how have you learned to handle your live on the air with the president of the United States, and he's coming after you and trying to force you to admit things that are going to show your bias? How do you handle that?
This is where I think having the long relationship has helped me, because I've been in these things with him before, and I've also been around him when he's gone out of his way to praise me. I mean, he praises the very journalists that he attacks. I mean, personally, it's really strange. There's this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing. So what I tell myself is that this is part of the show. He may genuinely be mad. There are times when he's genuinely mad about the coverage. I'm not saying that's all, just kind of fictitious here, but if you know that this is part of his game and this is what he wants to do, you just got to stay focused on what our jobs are. I mean, Sarah worked covering the White House for a long time. You just got to stay focused on the facts and realize it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter if he's going to attack me personally. He can call me a third-rate reporter. Who cares? I mean,
No, you're not. So you also talk about his ability to tell the truth or to not tell the truth, and his and administration's relationship to the truth. Now, a lot of people would say all politicians lie, all politicians hedge, spin. But I think you would put him in a different category in terms of his relationship with the truth.
Yes, I do, and I actually, and this is despite all of the conversation we just had, I really struggled with the ending of my book because I wanted to make a strong statement, and it's a statement that is in opposition to, as much as I don't want to be opposition party, it's in opposition to one central element of Trump the politician, and it's what I call the war on truth. And you see it. There's been a lot of, obviously, there's a lot of talk about how he habitually says things that aren't true. The Washington Post fact checker has documented thousands of false statements, since he was sworn in 2017. So that's one element of it. But he's willing to say things that are untrue without any concern. And if somebody calls him on it, he'll say, well, that's what I thought. It's not even a concern. But then he tries to undermine the very notion of objective truth. And that's what he does when he sees a story he doesn't like, that's fake news. Which we've get kind of numb to that term, but it's really offensive. I mean, you're taking you're saying that something is completely made up, that is carefully constructed, factually based. Journalists make mistakes, no question, but to take a story that you don't like and then brand it as fake is outrageous. And he's convinced about a third of the country, maybe more, that they really can't believe what they see with their own eyes. And I think that's dangerous. I think it's really dangerous. And because he has said things so often that are untrue and that have been exposed as being untrue, he's convinced, maybe nearly half the country on the other side to never believe anything he says. So between those two groups, you have people that not only have very different political views, but they don't agree on what the facts are. So how do you overcome divisions in our country if the two sides can't even agree on whether or not up is down or down is up?
And those two sides could be enough to reelect him.
Yes. Yeah.
He's been slipping in the polls lately. And that brings up the whole issue of how he's handling the coronavirus crisis. And, as you know, because you were there every day, last month he was doing press conferences almost every day. And at the same time, his popularity rating was plummeting. He's gotten away from that now. He went out to Arizona today because I guess his advisors got to him and convinced him that it wasn't a good idea. Talk a little bit about your experience covering those press conferences and why was that not a good thing for him?
Well, first of all, it was wild that he started doing it the way he did it, because he avoided the press briefing room for the first 3 years of his presidency. I described one kind of very strange appearance he made. It was the first time he ever was in there, at least during daylight hours when the press was around. Opened that blue door behind the podium, in the briefing room. He stuck his head out and a crush of people in it, and it kind of freaked him out. And he never came back again until sometime last year. He came and he did make an appearance with some of his advisors and left without taking any questions. So he had not done this. And then, the coronavirus task force is formed, and he comes out and he joins the press conference. And I think he suddenly realized that this briefing room, that is only, by the way, Sarah knows this, if you take a good 25 steps out of that door, that blue door, you can end up at the door of the Oval Office. It's right there. It's right there. And he realized by taking those steps, opening the blue door, going behind that podium, suddenly he could command the world's attention. All the cameras are already there. All the reporters are already assembled. And I think he just loved it. This is the Trump show. He talked about the ratings. And in the beginning, he was kind of like the MC, and he let the healthcare experts do most of the talking, and Vice President Pence. But as these went on, they moved more and more to the side. It got to the point where Anthony Fauci, when he was there, was sitting in the seats to the side. You wouldn't even see he was there. And it was all Trump. He was taking all the questions, doing all the things, and he was center stage. And I know that, some of his staunchest advisors in Congress, for instance, just pleaded with him, please stop, or please scale it back. It's not good for you. He got overexposed. He was saying things that had to be later corrected. He was sparring with reporters in a way that even some of his own supporters thought went too far. And then, of course, he started talking about maybe, could we inject disinfectant and help that? And that was like the last straw. People were like, you got to stop. You got to stop. But I think he'll come back, by the way. I think we'll see him back in that briefing room before long. Trust me.
Because of the virus, he can't do his rallies. He can't do campaign. He's in a campaign now. He's got to be able to get his story, his message out. Speaking of Fauci, we're going to go to questions from the audience in a minute, but the White House announced today, Trump said that he doesn't want to see Anthony Fauci testify before the Senate. And I think one of the rationales was that, he doesn't trust the Democrats. The Democrats aren't nice people, so he just doesn't want Fauci to be questioned by them. What do you make of that? What's behind that?
Well, first of all the things that have changed, one of the astounding things that this White House has done is to completely and totally stonewall Congress. And every White House tries to push back, but oversight is like a fundamental aspect of our system of government. And we saw it during the impeachment process, where they refused to turn over any documents, allow people to testify. They just steadfastly refused, and this didn't get a chance to get tested in court in any significant way, because it was going to take too long, and Democrats wanted to get through, and they had the votes. But these are some fundamental questions that are going to ultimately have to land in the Supreme Court. With the Fauci case, so here's what they did. The Office of Legislative Affairs, this is the part of the West Wing that deals with Congress, the president's staff, put out a letter internally to say that no member of the task force should agree to testify during the month of May. And it tried to spin it as, there's so much to do, we can't waste our time talking to Congress, but there was an exception, unless that member gets explicit approval from the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. So the House Appropriations Committee had asked Fauci to testify, and suddenly got the word he can't testify. But what the president said today was what you said: we can't trust the Democrats; they're just out to get us. We're not going to do that. But he did say that he would let Fauci testify before the Senate, which is controlled by Republicans. Which is just so you're going to testify to one because it's controlled by Republicans, but not the other because it's controlled by Democrats. That's not really how it works. So we'll see if he can really get away with that. But he got away with a hell of a lot during the impeachment process. And also it's a little ridiculous too, because if Fauci goes before a Senate committee, the chair might be a Republican, will be a Republican, but the Democrats get a chance to ask questions too. It's not so we'll see.
They need to work that one through.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Thanks for a lot of great questions here from you guys in the audience. Right now, politics and the news seem inescapable. Are you able to find ways to take a break? And do you think it's valuable or dangerous for people to take a break from the news?
Well, I think it's healthy to take a break from the news, even in this time when we really need to be informed. We need to track this. We've all becoming, everybody is trying to become an expert on coronavirus and on, how to protect oneself from an infectious disease like this. But you do need to take breaks. It's tough. I will tell you, I did get a puppy. So I got a very nice puppy. She may even make an appearance later because she's wandering around. But I got a nice puppy. There was talk in the house of naming the puppy Fauci, but we ended up naming her Brooklyn. But yeah, you do need to take a step back.
What kind of doggy is it?
It's a rescue dog. We think there's probably a little black lab in there. There might be border collie, we don't know. We are going to do one of those DNA tests and find out. Oh wait, and if you want, this is a cameo. It's a very nice dog.
Oh, sweetheart.
And her name is Brooklyn.
Hi, Brooklyn. Dogs are the big thing now in television news. One of our weather people here at ABC7, she always has her cute little beagle puppy right in the chair behind her when she's doing the weather. Everybody loves dogs.
Yes. She's
so,
awesome.
So speaking of covering the story, the politics in the age of coronavirus, we've got a campaign, a presidential campaign that really hasn't taken off, in probably in part because the art of campaigning, as we know it, is dead for the time being. How do you see this playing out in terms of the presidential campaign as we move forward, assuming that large parts of the country are going to continue to be locked down for weeks, if not months to come?
Well, I think it's going to be a real challenge for reporters and for television networks specifically, because we do have this notion of equal time. I mean, we have to cover both sides of a campaign, and Trump is so all consuming. You know, I mean, he's there, he's ubiquitous, he's doing things, he's making news, and Joe Biden, you know, is basically stuck at home, you know, trying to, doing virtual events and stuff. And we have to cover Joe Biden. It's, normally we would do that by having a reporter dedicated with the Democratic, with whatever the out party is, with that candidate, traveling the country, doing rallies, talking to supporters, talking to, getting a sense. And it's going to be a real challenge. And I don't really know how it's going to play out. Another big question is what happens with the conventions.
Yes.
And I mean, that's August. Are we going to be past this? Are we going to be beginning a second wave of this? Who knows? But I don't expect that the conventions are going to look the way they've looked in the past. I don't think you're going to see news organizations pushing in, the type of, the amount of people that we have had covering these things with big anchor sets and all that at these conventions, because there's so much uncertainty. And can you imagine? I mean, are we going to have a convention? Is one of the most crowded places on earth. I mean, how are we going to be able to do that?
Well, there's been some talk about that they may have to be virtual. That we, if you're going to, I mean, here in Illinois, our governor just announced today that, for the foreseeable future, probably the rest of this year, we aren't going to be able to have large conventions, as in business conventions where you might have 500 people. So how are you going to do tens of thousands of people?
A national political convention.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Chicago, do you have any thoughts on Chicago politics, or we've got a new mayor here who's been doing a little number from time to time on the president, and I don't know if you followed that closely, but we've got some fisticuffs and some tough political fighters here in Chicago.
You sure do, and your governor is somebody that manages to get under the president's skin from time to time as well. Look, we have Rahm Emanuel as an ABC contributor now, so we've got your former mayor, and I get to spend some time with him. I think that not just in Chicago and not just in Illinois, but I think that this crisis has put Democratic leaders in a real tricky situation vis-a-vis this White House, because you have a president who's quite volatile, and has said explicitly that he wants to be treated. He wants people to say nice things about him, and there's like this: is it going to affect my ability to help my constituents? Help my, if you're the mayor of Chicago, you're the governor of Illinois. Is this going to affect your ability to get federal help if you criticize what the federal government is doing? I mean, it's a little bit twisted, And I've been on a call. I was on one of these calls with the governors, just as an observer, and it was striking to me how each of them, and Pritzker was an exception, made a point of like prefacing their remarks about talking about how great, the federal response has been, and thank you, Mr. President, and the vice president's been wonderful. And we've been and they've all got massive concerns and issues, but they had to kind of go through,
The dance.
go through all this. It's weird.
So another question, let's see. How dangerous do you think it is truly to have our president carry on this vindication of journalism, a vilification of journalism? How do you continue to convince the people who live here that they can trust what they read? How many presidents have you covered, and has it changed over time? There's a few questions there. No,
those are all good and related. I think that the most interesting question embedded in there is, how do you convince these people to believe journalism? And what I really tried to do in this book is to first of all tell the story of what it's been like, because I think it's been a wild story. To first of all have this unique relationship that goes back so long, and I also spent time with him in the beginning of this presidential cycle as well. I had the first network interview with Donald Trump of the 2016 presidential cycle. It was actually 2 years before he rode down that escalator. It was in Iowa in 2013. I went back and revisited all these old interviews. It's fascinating to see, because I certainly didn't think he was actually going to run, but it was a long interview. We only aired about 4 minutes of it on our Sunday show, and it was like almost a half an hour interview. And it's fascinating to see the stuff we chose not to run. That's the interview. That's the interview in Iowa. Yes. But so what I tried to do is to tell that story and to tell it in a way that, whether or not you love Donald Trump or you think he is a threat to the republic, you would just be interested in the story. So I tried to keep my personal views. I wasn't out to praise him or to attack him. All these Trump books come in two categories. It's the, oh my God, the madman in the Oval Office is destroying our country, or, oh my God, Donald Trump's the greatest, president since Washington. And I didn't want to do either one of those at all. But I wanted to speak to those who really support him and believe his attacks on the press, and to show that I could tell a story in a way that is without bias, that is without malice, and then to kind of walk readers through what I again call this war on truth, and to demonstrate how destructive it is. And one of the examples I gave, because there's so many examples you can give of the president saying things that are not true, but I took as one kind of case study a series of statements that he made about military pay. This was a series of statements in 2018. And he had just signed into law, in a military appropriations bill that included a pay increase for the military. And it was a pay increase that, by the way, Congress voted in a bipartisan way to approve. And it was very much in keeping with previous pay increases. So in the beginning, he just says, we gave you a pay raise. It was great. It's gonna be, and it's a bigger pay raise than Obama ever gave you. And then, no, actually it wasn't. There were like 3 out of Obama's 8 years were bigger than this pay increase. And then it's like, and the exaggerations kept getting more, to the point where he said, this was your first pay increase in 10 years. Well, no, that's not true. The military's had a pay increase, as it should, military serves as they should for, going back decades. So no, that's not true. And then he said, I signed into law a 10% pay increase for all of you. Well, no, it was like about 3%. It wasn't 10%. So I just wanted to show, and here's what he said, and here's what the facts are. And here he's not lying about the press. He's not lying about what Democrats are doing. He's lying about military pay to members of the military. He said this, the last exaggeration was when he made a trip to visit service members in the war zone. You can't do that. So, again, I just kind of, without embellishment, here's what he said, here's what the facts are, and let people to be educated to judge for themselves.
What do you make of his stance toward China these days in the context of the pandemic? You know, he's taking a lot of shots at China, blaming China, implying that perhaps they intentionally or created this virus. What's his strategy there?
Well, it's interesting because in the early weeks of the pandemic, he was actually defending China. And he actually said China had been transparent. My friend, President Xi, I think they got this under control. So he's been, at that point, he clearly was worried about protecting his trade deal with China, and he was like, didn't want this to get in the way of that. So the rhetoric has changed. But let's face it, there is a lot to criticize China over on this. Now, I'm not talking about the conspiracy theories of the virus being developed in a lab in Wuhan and all that. What I'm talking about is the incredible secrecy of the Chinese Communist government of not letting the world know what was going on in Wuhan, and of silencing journalists, citizens from telling that story, not being, deceiving the World Health Organization, deceiving the rest of the world. And then when they shut down air travel in Wuhan, they shut down travel from Wuhan to other parts of China, but they didn't shut down air travel from Wuhan to other parts of the world. I think China has a lot to answer for on this. And you can just imagine how this could have played out differently if they had been more transparent and honest about what was happening. Maybe this thing could have been contained, certainly more than what happened. Now, that said, now you have Secretary of State Pompeo has talked about, whether or not this virus originated in the lab, and understand. So first of all, there doesn't appear to be any. There's certainly no evidence been presented that has happened, but it's possible. The intelligence community has said it's possible, but if it originated in the lab, that doesn't mean that it was created in the lab, because this lab was studying coronaviruses. And if they had faulty controls, the theory is somebody who worked in the lab might have gotten some of it on, may have been exposed, and then further exposed people in the Wuhan market. Now, that's not saying that it was intentionally done. That's saying that there was sloppiness and it was an accident. But when you listen to Mike Pompeo and the way he talked about it with my colleague Martha Raddatz on Sunday, Martha asked specifically, are you suggesting that this was intentionally done? And instead of Pompeo saying, no, there's absolutely no evidence of that, that's not what I'm saying. It's like, well, he wouldn't say yes or no. And the rhetoric is really, really hot. And I don't know if you saw this, but Reuters had a fascinating story, disturbing story, the other day about one of the Chinese security ministries presenting a report to the leaders of China, saying that China's public perception of China around the world is at its lowest level since the Tiananmen Square massacre. And the point of the report was to warn that it's gotten so bad that we need to prepare for the possibility of war, particularly war with the United States. So, when you're talking about intelligence and you're talking about, allegations of that ultimately could be attributable to hundreds of thousands of deaths around the world, you have to be really careful. You can't be cavalier with this stuff.
Absolutely. Even more reason why we need a vigilant press and fearless press. So we're going to wrap it up now, but I'm just wondering whether or not the president has read your book. Do you have any idea? I'm sure you must have gotten him a copy.
So I have a new piece of information on this, just fresh. So first of all, about 2 weeks ago, I had a Republican congressman reach out to me, somebody who I had interviewed a while back, and say that they had just been in to see the president, and with a group of Republican members of Congress, and that my book was on his desk, the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. So that was interesting. And that was right around the time that he was attacking me as, you know, in those briefings. So I don't know if it was, you know, one thing later, I don't know. But then I just got a call actually on my way here, back home. I was out at the ABC bureau, and on my way I got a call from another Republican member of Congress, because I actually just did an interview on Fox News with Brett Baer, rare cameo appearance about the book, and this guy had seen it, and he said, "I want you to know, I met with the president just last week, so this is a different time," and said I had lunch with him in his in the room next to the Oval Office, and he had your book with him there. So now I've got 2 spottings of the book in 2 different places with Trump. So I don't know. I don't know if he's read it. I'm sure he's at least seen the pictures.
Yeah. Well, if he's read it, you may have even more difficulty in the White House in the future.
There may be things in the book he likes, by the way. I think there really are things in the books that he would like. But
if it's about him, he always likes it.
yes.
It's been a great conversation, John. Thanks so much. Good luck to you, and keep it coming. And I'm going to
thank you, Laura. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you, and it's good to be in Chicago, if even only virtually. And thanks to the great Sarah Ruth. Thank you very much.
Sarah?
John, thank you so much. I realized I first met you in '95. Right. So you are not third rate in my book ever. But thank you so much. Laura, thank you. Everyone, please go get Front Row at the Trump Show, available in bookstores now. And we really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. Take care, guys.
Bye. We have many new virtual programs coming, so please check out chicagoideas.com. And thank you all for joining us. Have a good night.